Hello, everybody. Welcome to this event in the Alumni Week of our university. And I would like to, it is my pleasure to have you with us and that you've joined us. And for those of you who are here live today, you will get the real thing as it's happening, but also thank you to those of you who are watching the recording afterwards. I hope you will get the same experience. We are lucky today to have a great panel coming to you from the Creative School at Ryerson University. My name's Charles Falzon. I'm the Dean of the faculty. And for those of you who may be wondering what the Creative School is, that's the faculty that until recently was called the Faculty of Communication and Design. And for those of you who graduated even longer ago, just like I did, it was once called the Faculty of Applied Arts. So this was the faculty that was the home of the schools, the professional schools that you graduated from and that are still in existence today and are still amongst the best in their class. And it's a delight for me to be here and to welcome you. As you know, we have today a conversation with the creators of Little Mosque on the Prairie. But before we get into that, I'm going to do something that we do quite regularly now, and I think quite appropriately so at the university, which is to do the land acknowledgement. And even though we're all probably in different places, I'm going to acknowledge the land that our campus sits on. And it is indeed to acknowledge that Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. And that's a territory that was made between the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee people, and it bound them together to this territory in the spirit of peace and love and to protect the land. And since then, other Indigenous nations and other people came to the land, and other visitors and newcomers from all around the world. And like me, I'm a visitor to this, and we were all invited to this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And I think it's an acknowledgement that every time I share it, it actually brings new meaning to the words. So I hope you feel the same way. So at our faculty, we're about creativity. That's why we're called the Creative School. And really, it's not about creativity and just making things, but the effect of creativity, the impact that it has on not simply an audience that is being entertained, but in the fabric of society. New narratives, new approaches, new innovations in the way we see the world going forward. And I don't think there are many better examples from one of our alumni recently to better examples than this series, Little Mosque on the Prairie. It is, in fact, a show that was a unique concept, thoughtfully and creatively executed, and it had profound impact in society in so many ways. So tonight, I hope that we're going to be exploring this further and getting a sense of how that series, but also how film and television, and specifically comedy, could in fact contribute to social change. We are joined by the creators of Little Mosque on the Prairie, Zarqa Nawaz and Michael Kennedy. Zarqa is an award-winning Canadian film and television producer, published author, public speaker, journalist, and former broadcaster. She's also a Creative School alum, having graduated here from the School of Journalism in 1992. In 2007, Zarqa created the renowned series that I've been talking about, Little Mosque on the Prairie, which was the world's first sitcom about a Muslim family living in the West. The show premiered in the highest CBC ratings, with the highest CBC ratings in over 20 years, and went on to win several awards, including a Gemini, and it is now broadcast in over 60 countries. Our second panelist is Michael Kennedy. Michael is an award-winning Canadian filmmaker, director, producer, writer, cinematographer, and photographer. Michael is also a Creative School alum, and he graduated from the School of Image Arts in 1978. He has directed 17 feature-length theatrical films, or TV movies, and over 230 episodes of primetime TV network drama and comedy, including pilots for 14 different TV shows. And he, as I said, also directed the series Little Mosque on the Prairie. So these are two examples of alumni of our faculty that have not only succeeded in their careers, but have actually had impact in a major way in our society. So enjoy the evening. I'd like to now introduce you to the moderator of the panel, my colleague Rana Latif. Rana Latif is the Director of Strategic Development and Marketing of the Creative School, and also responsible for all marketing and communications activities for the various professional schools and the faculty as a whole, and our international activities. So she has a big portfolio. Rana was previously a journalist, a successful journalist involved in news production and reporting for organizations including the CBC and many others. She also taught journalism at Ryerson and at the American University of Cairo, and trained journalists across the Middle East through the Thomson Reuters Foundation. After that, after the formal moderation of the panel and the discussion, we will have questions and answers. And my colleague Iman Thaver, who is a development associate with our advancement group at the Creative School, will be taking on the role of coordinating your questions and making sure that they're getting answered by the right people. And so Iman will be joining at that place. And I invite you to put questions along the way in the chat, and Iman will put them in order and take care of them later, or you can ask them later as well. But as they come up, feel free to put the questions in the chat, and Iman will make sure that they are remembered. So with no further ado, enjoy this. I know I'm looking forward to this discussion, and I'll pass it on to Rana to start the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Charles, for the introduction. Zarqa and Michael, welcome. We're very happy to have you back. We're proud of you as our alumni, and we're very excited to have this conversation with you to talk about your successes and your journeys, and inviting the audience as well to ask questions and allow Zarqa and Michael to answer all the questions. So I'm just gonna go back a little bit, Zarqa and Michael. Let me start with you, Zarqa. You studied journalism at Ryerson. I'm gonna get to the show. I know everyone wants to know about everything that how the show came together and everything. But let's just go back in time a little bit. You studied journalism, Zarqa, and I know you wrote a memoir, and you talked a little bit about your experience joining the journalism school and how your family reacted to that, and how you ended up being a filmmaker, a content creator, a documentarian. Like, how did it all kind of happen?
Well, thanks so much for inviting me to be on this panel, Rana. It was a really circuitous route. I'm 50, about to be turning 54 years old, and back in the day, as we like to say, Muslims going into journalism was not common, or film. It was, my family was part of the first wave of immigration, Pakistani immigrants via England to Canada. And like a lot of, immigrant parents, they wanted their children to go into very secure, successful, well-paying jobs. Number one, medicine, always the gold standard. Number two, I think engineering is number two. Number three is accounting. Number four is lawyer, because lawyers, you just don't know right, if they'll make as much money. And so that was it. Like, from the beginning, I was almost brainwashed. I would say, this is what you're going to be in your life. And I was a little kid, and I drank the Kool-Aid, and I said, yes, I'll try really hard. And what that meant, having to be really good at science and math. And I was really good at those subjects in high school. But once I got to university, I just couldn't summon the necessary enthusiasm to get the 90s in organic chemistry and physics. And I was sort of starting to get exposed to the arts, and writing. And I was really starting to enjoy those classes and getting A's in those classes, and not getting A's in organic chemistry or physics, which should have been the sign for me. But the thing is, you grow up with this, like, there's only one career option, like literally there's no plan B. So my marks were not good. And when I got the letter that I had been rejected, it was like such a shock, right? I just, like, that part of my life had never played out before, that I wouldn't get in. And what do you do if you don't get in? Because I hadn't been prepared for any other career. And so I was like in a state of shock. I was just like, what is happening? And, my mother, of course, was always like, because my father, I should mention, I was his only daughter. He had 2 sons. He had seen his female relatives in Pakistan because of the very, violent and horrific partition when India was divided into 2 countries. And, he had been 15 and had seen the disruption in his own family. And in those days, girls got married early. And he always believed women had so much potential for education. And he didn't like it when his female relatives got married early. He felt that, marriage and children ruined a woman's life. And he always believed that women should be educated. And whenever he met a woman, he would always ask her, what did you study? And, she'd say, I have a BSc or a BA. And he goes, well, why didn't you get your master's? And she goes, well, I got married and had children. If she had a master's, why didn't you get your PhD? And it was, I got married and had children. So he associated marriage and children with everything that was negative with women. And so when he had his only daughter, he had the same mind frame, become a doctor, make a lot of money, never get married. Men are the worst thing that can happen to you. Marriage is the worst thing that can happen to you. And so I said, okay, this is the goal in my life. But my mother, who did not believe that marriage had been the worst thing for her, really didn't like this philosophy. She felt surely we could find a middle road. And so when I didn't get into medical school, she was like, oh, now we can start talking about marriage. And I was like, what? Wait, what's happening? And I wasn't ready to get married. I just felt like, because my father had indoctrinated me so strongly with ambition and drive and career, that I felt like I associated marriage with failure, right? So I was like, no, I gotta find another way. I can't. So it was the perfect pick me up, because I was kind of like licking my wounds and going, is my career over? And I was like, oh, it can't be over. And I had a best friend who was always talking about, being a writer and writing novels and making films. And it always seemed like that forbidden, sexy, you can't attain that as a brown girl, from, Pakistani parents and being a good Muslim like that. Like, oh, that's like lipstick and sex and fishnet stockings. It's just like out there, right? It's just too much. But there's nothing like your mom wanting to marry you off to get you to say, okay, time to regroup. And I noticed that Ryerson was still accepting applications for their journalism program. And so I applied. And, Ryerson, as people know, is one of the hardest journalism programs to get into. And they offered me an interview. And the interviewer said, we've never had someone with a science degree applied. Everyone's always applied with BAs. What inspired you? And, I was doing some quick thinking, and I said, listen, you guys are the most competitive program. The only way I knew I was going to stand out as an applicant was if I got an arts degree instead of a science degree. Sorry, I got a science degree instead of an arts degree, so I could stand above, the art students. And he said, that was such clever thinking, for you to think so, far in advance. And I said, yes, it was. And he goes, we are desperate for journalists with a science background to write about these issues, because it's hard to get these issues in the newspaper in an accurate way. And I said, if you let me in, I promise I will write everything about science for you, which was totally lying, because I didn't even remember half the things that I learned, in getting my BSc, but it worked. Because I didn't have a portfolio. This is a terrible thing to admit, right? This has been like over 20 years, but I hadn't really have a portfolio. I hadn't spent, all these poor, students with their BAs had spent years working for community newspapers, and they had stacks of articles, and I really didn't have anything. But based on that, because I had a science degree, nobody else did, he let me in. And that's when my life sort of made this radical 180 change, because suddenly I was exposed to a world of arts, writing articles and meeting people, and the whole world of journalism, opened up this world for me that I had never been exposed to before. And that was how I began my journey into a creative field.
Zarqa, this is incredible. I can relate to a lot of it. But Michael, also, you have a very interesting story about your studies at Ryerson. You studied photography initially, but then you ended up, as a filmmaker. So you also had a bit of a switch during your studies at Ryerson. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. And first of all, I want to say I'm really thrilled to be asked to take part in this. Anything that promotes diversity is good with me. And I'm also happy to be on anything with Zarqa, who she's my inspiration. I love Zarqa, and I'm so proud of what we did together, and so happy that we're carrying on and doing things like this together. So yeah, I mean, also, but I'm kind of the opposite of Zarqa. I don't think my parents had any ambitions for me, and they didn't care what I did as long as I left. And I came up to go to Ryerson. Well, I went to Dalhousie University, and I should have went to law school. And that was really my plan, to go to law school and take over the world. But around the time I should have applied to law school, I chickened out, and I thought, oh, that'll be the death of me. And I thought, what am I interested in? I need to find something I can really apply myself to. Well, I'm really interested in basketball, but I had arthritis and was walking on a cane at that time. I didn't think that was going to work. I was really interested in women, but I don't think that was going to be a career. And I was really interested in photography. And so I came to Ryerson to study photography. And in first year, they said, well, actually in first year, you have to take film and photography. And then you decide in second year which one to major in. And I was like, hold it, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You mean there's some people here who think they're going to be filmmakers? I mean, it's bad enough that I came here, gave up law school to be a photographer, but at least photography is actually a job, Okay, within about 3 months, I was totally hooked on film. I just loved film. To me, it was everything. Film found me. Film grabbed me and wouldn't let me go. And I was a pretty keen student. If they said make 3 films, I'd make 6 films. And I've just been doing it ever since. And someday I have to form a career plan and go about this properly. But meanwhile, film is just pulling me along, film and TV, and I'm just enjoying the ride.
Michael, did you meet Zarqa at all before the show, before Little Mosque on the Prairie?
Well, no, not really. Prior to it kind of coming up in the into my world, in that I was doing quite a bit of TV work and quite a few pilots, as you mentioned. I think I did 14 altogether. And I was approached by the CBC to do the pilot for her show. And frankly, I just thought it was the best idea for a TV show I'd ever heard. I was just knocked out by the bravery of her and the rest, who said, yeah, you know what, in this post 9/11 world, I think we should make a comedy about Muslims. So I said, I'm in, and was really happy to meet Zarqa, and quickly was kind of motivated by her spirit. As you can tell already, she's got an incredible spirit and energy of, come on, we can do it, let's do it. And we did the pilot in June, 2-episode pilot. We shot in June in Regina, and it was tested and went through the roof during the summer. And so they said, you got to quickly come back from your holiday in PEI. We got to do the first season right away in the fall. And we actually seen the pilot in November in Toronto and had to make them look like what we shot in June in Regina to complete the first a couple of episodes, because we replaced a major character. And so I was lucky and got to do the whole first season, which was a wonderful thing, because it allowed me to be really embedded in the show with Zarqa and all the rest of the creative team every day, every week for the whole season. And it was really a life-shaping experience.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm really curious to know, Zarqa, how did the idea come into play? Like, really do a comedy about Muslims? Really, post 9/11?
A crazy idea.
Are you kidding me? How did it all come together? I mean, I would love to know how the idea first evolved, and then I have tons of questions about how you were actually able to make it happen. How do you go to a network, and tell them, let's do a comedy about Muslims in the West, when it was like a bit sensitive to do that, right? So
yeah, a bit,
just a tad.
I was making short, so I should say, once I got into journalism, I realized I should have gone into film. And but I didn't want to do another degree now, because I had a journalism degree that took 4 years. And by now I am married. I met a great guy in Saskatchewan, to my mother's eternal relief. And he was so supportive. He's like, you want to go into film? I said, I really want to go and take a course in filmmaking to see if I can make it. And I took a course at the Ontario College of Art. They had a summer filmmaking course. And I did, each of us gets in a team of 5 people, and you rotate, being the writer director for each other's projects. And at that time, I believe it was 1995, and the Oklahoma bombing happened, and they arrested all these Muslims, and their pictures were on the Toronto Stars, all the suspects that were being removed from planes. And then the next day it was like Timothy McVeigh, a white guy. And I was like, really? Like, all this media attention just on Muslims, and then it's 180s, it's not even like brown even. So I thought that just screamed comedy to me. And so I wrote a short film called Barbecue Muslims. And it was about, Muslims who are 2 brothers who are sleeping one night and the barbecue blows up in their backyard. And they're accused of being Middle Eastern terrorists. And the real terrorists are anti-barbecue resistance, because they believe barbecues are causing, CO pollution in the air, global warming. They were ahead of their time. and so it was a comedy about the police were arresting the Muslims and ignoring the real terrorists. And it was a terrible, you can see it on my website. It was a schlocky film. I used my, parents' house, my brother, the neighbors. But I thought, of course, it deserved an Oscar, and submitted it to the Toronto International Film Festival. And then a few months later, I got this irate phone call from one of the programmers. He's like, you know what? People have submitted like technically perfect films. Then there's you. And he goes, but we cannot ignore the fact that no one's ever sent us a comedy about Muslims and terrorism before, because this was 1995. And we are forced to program it. But we're telling you, you better, for your next film, not submit something to such, with such terrible technical specs. You make a better film, because this is like once in a lifetime chance. So I'm like, oh, okay. So they air it, and they program it, and I'm in the audience, and I can hear people laughing. And I think it was the first time I realized, oh my God, I made a comedy. I don't think I consciously understood what I was doing. I think that the actors understood, because they started ad-libbing, and some of the lines they were making up to make it more funny, and people were laughing. And I thought, wow, I think I have a sensibility of comedy and politics, and I can kind of fuse those. And once you get into TIFF, you're able to use that on applications and then be able to apply for more money. And those days it's film, it's actual film. And Michael could tell you real film is expensive in the mid 1990s. And so I cobbled together another 30,000 and made a film called Death Threat. And it was about a Muslim woman who is desperately trying to get a death threat on purpose so she can ignite her publishing career. And it was sort of my take on Salman Rushdie and the whole Rushdie dilemma about fatwas and freedom of speech. And this time, TIFF accepted it, and it was much, proper funding, had proper actors, and I had directed that film. And I was like, oh, okay, so I believe I'm going to go, and start making films. I started working on a feature, but then the National Film Board of Canada approached me, and they said, we kind of know you can make these kooky films, but could you do something serious? Could you make a documentary? And, there was sort of this wave of conservatism going across the Muslim world, similar to what's happening in the Christian world. And I thought, let's make a documentary about that, that how do men and women worship in the same space? It used to be, there was no issue, but then as conservatism spread, people started mistaking culture and tradition for theology and started putting curtains in front of women. And I thought this would be a really interesting avenue to explore and talk to men. And I was really lucky. I got all these male scholars who were like, this is all culture and there's no evidence in theology. Women and men shouldn't, be separated like that in a prayer hall. So I made a documentary about that, and the National Film Board asked us to promote it at the Banff Television Festival that year. And I asked a friend of mine, and she said, well, if you're going there, you should really be pitching a television series, because that's what people do when they go and they're paying your way, and don't waste your opportunity. And a friend of mine gave me treatment, like a log line and actors and how you pitch a TV show. So I made up a show about a Muslim an imam who leaves Toronto for Saskatchewan to run a mosque, but he's born and raised in Canada. And how would that change the dynamics between him and his community? And I started pitching it there. And there was a company based in Saskatchewan called Westwind Productions. And they said, we like this idea. And that we developed it together. And then we took it to CBC. And Anton Leo at the time was the head of comedy. And he said, we really like this idea. It's in the zeitgeist. And he himself was the son of Italian immigrants. He goes, I can really relate to your stories. And I think even then I would say, Michael, people were, this is 2006, and we didn't have a history of sitcom success the way we do today. And I think in that time period, no one really thought this was going to be the breakout success, because up to that point, we had shows like Beachcombers and King of Kensington. And there was a sense in the air that Canada just couldn't do sitcoms. And it was a huge shock when the media got wind of this, because I think they thought literally like CBC is doing a comedy about Muslims in this time period, and what are they nuts? Like Muslims are going to destroy the building and flip cars and set, Toronto on fire. And that got the media in the US interested. And suddenly the New York Times and the American media started paying attention, which makes the Canadian media pay attention. And in Canada at that time, we just didn't have the millions and millions of ad dollars that Americans do to promote their shows, which is one of the reasons why it's so hard to get Canadian shows to survive. Because in those days, you would be in competition with American shows. This is, on the CBC or CTV, like, there were American shows and people would rather watch those because they hadn't even heard of the Canadian shows, and they would like disappear because they wouldn't get the ratings. But we had suddenly the benefit of the Americans paying attention when we aired. And
not just the Americans. It's the first show I worked on that had somebody from Al Jazeera hovering on the edges of the set, waiting to ask us questions.
Do you remember, Michael? I mean, would you say in that time, Michael, that Canada didn't really have a successful sitcom?
Well, I hear what you're saying, Zarqa, but I wouldn't go that far, since I worked on a few. Like Made in Canada, Rick Mercer's show was a wonderful show that went for several years, and I was lucky and worked on many of them. And Ron James did a show called Black Fly, which actually satirized colonial attitudes and prejudice against Indigenous people. But Little Mosque just rocked the comic world, especially at the CBC. The CBC's ratings were declining, and there was a lot of pressure, political pressure on the CBC. Some people were, talking about the demise of the CBC. And then, when Little Mosque premiered with 2.2 million viewers, like, wow, that just rocked everybody. And boom, it was off to the races. So it made a huge change and gave a lot of people confidence in comedy that could take on sensitive social issues, and comedy that was out to make change.
Michael, when you were approached to direct the first season, what went through your mind on the first night? You're going to be doing a comedy on Muslims. You probably may not know much about them. So how did you feel about it, and what went through your head during that first night?
Well, I did have some trepidation, because I did not know much about Islam and Muslims. But I felt pretty confident about directing and about doing comedy. I learned a lot over the years from working with people like Kids in the Hall and Rick Mercer and Ron James and Colin Mockery and Mark Farrell and all these great Canadian talents, and I knew that I just had to show respect, basically, for the topic and for where Zarqa was coming from. And we always looked to her for guidance. And we had a lot of fantastic talent working on the show. Because it was a hit show, it pulled in a lot of great talent. And it's a team effort, as you may know, filmmaking and TV, which I really enjoy. So I just kind of played my part in the team, frankly, and really enjoyed it. And I learned a lot every day, frankly. And I learned a lot about Islam. And I was really thrilled to be able to take part in something that was promoting tolerance and pointing out how ridiculous prejudice is and how we're all human.
Michael, I was just, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking of my next question to both of you, and I'll start with Zarqa. But what were you really trying to get, or what were you hoping to get by creating? I know, you just mentioned that you had also the previous films that you had done, also kind of showcasing Muslims in the West. But what were you hoping to get, and did you get it?
Zarqa.
I think that people always ask me that, like I had an agenda or there was something behind me, but I think I like most writers who are funny, who just get an idea and go, wouldn't that be hilarious? What would happen in a mosque if the imam was young and he thought he was so hip and cool, and the bearded man that I normally see who runs things would be like, who is this guy? And this conflict between generations and cultures, and then the whole issue about women, like it's such, you know, it's so many. I mean, we see this in every faith. It's a universal issue of women, the issue of the women. Like, what are we going to do with those women? And as a woman, I go, this would be such a fantastic opportunity to talk about those things. And so I really thought it was just hilarious. I mean, if you think about how white writers think, they don't say, okay, I have this agenda and I'm going to do this and this is my, you know, they're just like, this is a great idea, let's explore it and let's make it as funny as possible. And so I'm not really that deep as a person. I just wanted to make a really funny, hilarious entertainment that people could watch and say, wow, that's so good. I was entertained. I watched this. And then, so then all this other stuff started, you know, people are like, oh, they're learning and all the stats and the studies. And then, did you know there's a double-blind study at the university? And I'm like, I don't know about that stuff. Because I'm not an academic. I'm literally just a writer who loves comedy and making people laugh. And I just want to make the best story possible.
I just want to chime in on that. I mean, I also felt that my main job was to make sure it was as funny as possible, because I knew if it wasn't funny, people wouldn't be watching. And if people weren't watching, we weren't going to get our message across. We weren't going to make any change. And I had done a lot of shows and a lot of movies. And as my career went on, I was more and more interested in doing shows that had impact and had meaning, and that I could be really proud of. They weren't just fun to make and made money, but actually had an impact on the world. And Zarka's right. The emphasis was on comedy and entertainment. But you see, she's being very self-deprecating because her instincts already had put us in the arena. The fact that we're trying to make a comedy about Muslims in a post 9/11 world was huge. So the controversy was there, the issues were there, the things that had to change and be tackled were there, waiting to be tackled. And so we just took it on with comedy. So she's downplaying it a bit, but she's right in that, you know, we don't like have strategic, serious discussions about what issue will we take on here. I mean, sure, there was the issues, though, were human issues because it was about characters. And the most successful ones were about the female characters. You know, oh, the great episode where Babur decides that the females should have a separate entrance to the mosque. That was beautiful. And that's based on a real event that happened. And we just spun a more comedic approach on it. And so we're actually indicating how ridiculous that is and how unfair that is to the females. So really her instincts and heart were already in the right place. So then we could just kind of play with the comedy.
Do you think that part of the success of the show, post 9/11 was like people were just curious about who Muslims are? Like, how do they, we hear about Muslims and, how they're kind of blowing up our buildings and trying to attack us. And maybe they were a little bit curious about what they do and what their issues are. And do you think that played a role a little bit in the success? I mean, when you had in your premiere 2.2 million viewers, that's quite a number. And so I wonder why 2.2 million people, before they even watched the show, before they saw how you put it together, Michael, and how you created the characters, Zarika, like, why did they just kind of watch the first episode or the first 1 or 2 episodes, in your opinion?
Well, I think the controversy helped enormously. I think, in 2005, there had been the Danish cartoon controversy. And I think there was this fear that no one could ever put Muslims on television because we would like rise up as a mass and destroy you, right? There was a sense. And I think it was a fallacy, but nobody had the guts to do it. And then suddenly when CBC said, okay, we'll do it, everyone was like, oh no, like you don't know what you're getting yourself into. Muslims have no sense of, like 1 billion people think exactly in the same way and will like all rise up and burn you. And like literally that's what they thought. And so everyone was watching us for that to happen, right? And so I think people thought the CBC was nuts. First of all, to do the first television show about Muslims, and then to make it a comedy, and then to put it in the mosque, and then to have jokes about Islam, it was like it's blowing people's minds away. And I think so everyone was just like, we got to see if they could, who could pull this off, because no one had done it before, and no one had seen Muslims as just normal humans doing normal human things. I mean, it was the first of its kind. Even diversity, like this was prior to the whole movement of diversity in television, to have like non-white leads in a show, like who would watch it? And so it was like all these things came together in one package. And then the fact that we aired and it was a funny show, and as Michael goes, it was entertaining, and people are like, it made me laugh. I'd like to see what the next one is about. Because had it been sanctimonious and had it been about Muslims are so good and we're perfect, because a lot of Muslims did ask me that, why can't we all be perfect? Why does Babur have to be so, like making mistakes? Like everybody should be perfect. And I'm like, no, that's propaganda. Nobody would want to watch that. We would die after the first episode. So it was important that it just be good entertainment, and it just happened to be about Muslims.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, I think there was some fear. Obviously, many people, out of lack of interaction and lack of knowledge, were afraid of Muslims and Islam. There was a great deal of curiosity about Muslims and about this show, which was going to attempt to take humor into the Muslim arena. By the way, I'll just mention something that was interesting. As Zarqa said, there was quite a bit of press revolving around the premiere of the show. And I was interviewed on some American newsy talk show. I think it was maybe on Fox Channel. And the first question the person asked me was, so what's so funny about people flying planes into our towers? I said, I have a feeling you haven't watched the show, because that's not what our show is about. Our show is about human beings. Some of them are wise, some of them are silly. Some of them are Muslim, some of them are Anglican. And guess what? They're all human beings with their strengths and weaknesses. And they're all entertaining, and most of them are humorous as well. So our show is about humor and tolerance, and you should watch it before you interview me.
I have a question about it being a comedy. A lot of our students, they use comedy to get a message across, especially on TikTok. And so I would just want to ask you about the fact that it was a comedy. Did it really help is it more inviting when it's a comedy? People feel maybe like it's less serious. They get to see it, a humorous side. It's entertainment. Like you said, Zarqa and Michael, what is the role of comedy in getting a serious message across and actually in creating social change?
Would you like to go first, Zarqa?
Sure. I mean, I think it breaks down people's guards. And like if it was a drama, people would feel like they're being lectured to. But if it's a comedy, they laugh, and then they probably wonder why they laughed. Like what, and then it humanizes. Like Babur's my nemesis in real life, right? Like this bearded guy who's really strict and always having these rules at the mosque. But people loved him on Little Mosque. And I remember hearing one American man going, I can't look at a bearded man in the same way again, because he's seeing the humanity in this person that he had never seen before. Otherwise, he'd see him on the news, like always, angry and, threatening the West. But he's seeing him as a single dad trying to raise a daughter and making, a hash at the mosque with his decisions. And I think that has a profound psychological effect on people and how they view somebody else. It removes the otherness of that person and makes them human, and like someone that could be my neighbor, someone I could meet, someone that I could have coffee with and relate about what it's like to raise a child. And I think that was critical to the success of this show, and one of the most important things that came out of it.
What about you, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that for sure. And when you do a show like this, it really makes you think about how comedy works and why it works. And besides the things that Zarqa already mentioned, I mean, I think that comedy has the ability to open your eyes and your hearts in a way that drama does not. Comedy persuades, but not through facts, but through illustrating attitudes and adjusting people's feelings about their own perceptions. I think, weirdly, comedy has the ability to make complex social issues actually accessible. I remember that shortly after, I think it was after the end of the first season, I was invited to this big international TV festival in Rome. And around that time, somebody said, Zarqa, you may know, I think he was the head of the Islamic Society of North America or something. And he said, this show is going to do more for relations between Muslims and non-Muslims than all the symposiums for the next 10 years. Because comedy, as Zarqa says, relaxes people and allows people to open their minds and their hearts and be open. It uses a non-threatening approach to introduce people to new norms. So that way it can break down social barriers. So it was actually, even though it was just her instinct again, which was fantastic to go to comedy, it was the perfect vehicle to tackle Muslim, non-Muslim relations and the whole issue of tolerance.
And, you know, back to our students, because I see a lot of their work and I meet them a lot. And they do definitely use comedy and content creation. But also they're really all about social change. They're really all about diversity, inclusion, social justice. So just as successful filmmakers, content creators, you both wear multiple hats successfully, award-winning alum. What do you tell them about using, you know, the film and television to, you know, make an impact? What is an advice that you would share for with our students, with the up and coming creators?
I don't know, Michael, you go. You go first.
Well, it's a tough question. Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I think, as I said in the beginning of this session, I've been inspired by Zarqa, and I'd like to see the students also inspired by her. And that means be brave, you know, be confident. Don't be afraid to take on any issue by whatever means you're inclined to tackle it. You know, I'm sure many people would have advised Zarqa, a comedy about Muslims, I don't think so. But it was a great idea. Like I said, I thought it was the best idea I'd ever heard. So I want them to be brave and be confident. And the other thing I've learned from Zarqa and from the people who made this show and all the many shows I've worked on is the power of collaboration, creative collaboration. So I encourage them to find creative collaborators that share their vision and share their goals, and things will start to click. I never did anything in film and TV on my own, nothing. I only did it through great collaborators like Zarqa and all the other people who worked on this show and all the other shows. So be confident, be brave, and find yourself some creative collaborators to team up with and tackle these issues. Zarqa, you got to add anything, any advice to add?
I would say be true to your voice. Don't go in with an agenda. Go in with what you think is the best story, and don't worry about what people are going to say. Like, I really didn't think in my mind this. Had I known what Little Mosque was going to be and how it was going to blow up and change my life, I mean, it would have been hard to do. I had no idea. We were all innocent, all of us, Michael. Like, oh, this is a good idea. Let's just try it. No clue that it was going to like change our lives in the way that it did. I just thought it was a funny idea, and it was about my life, which is why having diverse creators is so important. Because if you have the same, group of people talking about their experiences, it's always the same experience that we're all watching day in and day out. But by just having, a Muslim woman who's really talking about the mundane things in my life, like going to the mosque and the nutty things that happened to me there, it's just a normal experience. But no one's ever seen that before. And everyone just says, oh my God, like what is happening? But that wasn't unusual for me. That was ordinary, and it's part of probably many Muslims' journeys and stories, or not, because each Muslim has a different story to tell. But it was a part of my life that had never, ever been exposed on television before, ever. And I think CBC had no idea what a visceral reaction it was going to be. Like, no one could see it coming. And I think that's important, because those, like, we have to have a diversity of experiences that we all see on television. We have to have First Nation stories and Black stories and Filipino stories. We need to see all those stories. It can't always be the same story told by the same people all the time. And because, it has dire consequences, because there's been lots of studies that children who see, only one type of story, whenever they see another person of a different color, they associate goodness and badness with that, and that has catastrophic effects as they grow up. And we've already seen that, the rate of violence against people of color, particularly right now, the Asian community, Muslim community. We've seen someone run over a Muslim family in London. Like, they are absorbing images and messages from the media, and it makes a difference in how they view people as human. And there are people out there that don't view people of color as human beings with the same right to life as other people, because of the way they're exposed to media. And I didn't understand the importance of that until Little Mosque came, and then people started coming up to me and said, we've taken your show and done studies. We've gotten a group together and said, you watch, 5 episodes of Friends, and this group will watch 5 episodes of Little Mosque on the Prairie, and we will measure how they feel about Muslims before and after. And there is a measurable difference in people's attitudes and viewing groups as human and good and part of society versus, evil and should be eliminated. And that's a really big deal from a sociological point of view. And even though we don't go into this, to change that part of it, it has an impact. It has a very measurable impact.
I want to thank you both, Zarqa and Michael. The conversation doesn't end here. My questions do. I'm seeing a lot of interesting questions coming through the chat, so I'm looking forward to hearing your answers. And I will pass it on to Iman, who will be moderating the next part of this panel discussion.
Thanks so much, Rana, and thanks, Zarqa and Michael, for that great conversation. We've already got a bunch of questions from the audience, so I'll jump right into those. Our first question is, if the show were to be made today, would the characters of Fred, Joe, or Baba be written differently? And kind of a related question is, if the show in general were made today, how would it be any different?
Would you like
Or would it be
to?
any different?
You can go first, Michael.
Well, they've pointed out, I guess, the 3 most conservative characters. Fred is the one who sees them in the pilot. He walks into the mosque and he sees people praying, and he's like afraid and goes running away. And the Indian minister says, "Oh, don't worry, it's we're just renting them the space. It's just a pilot project." He says, "They're training pilots." So that's Fred, and Joe is. I think Joe is the radio host, right?
I think it was Fred Tepper that's the radio.
Yeah, Fred
isn't he?
Tepper.
Or I had it the other way around.
Right, yeah.
So one of them is the right-wing, local guy, redneck, and one of them's the redneck radio show host, and they both share a fear of Muslims. So they're very conservative and kind of reactionary. And then Babar, of course, she already mentioned him. He's your ultra-conservative Muslim. And he's always into, we must do this and we must do that. And yes, we must do
With the fingers, exactly, yeah.
Now, you need, we already pointed out, Zarqa was very wise, you need diverse characters on all sides of this. You need diverse, personality diversity in the Muslim characters and the non-Muslim characters, obviously, right?
Right.
And you need people to represent all of the different viewpoints that people have out there, right? And I'll just say this about Babar, he represents kind of the conservative aspects of Islam, you might say, but he's also got a heart of gold. He's got a big heart, and he's a dad, mainly. Mm-hmm. And all the stuff with him and his teenage daughter was quite sweet and quite touching. And people saw that even this guy who has these radical views, he's got a little soft side. And of course, Arlene Duncan in the cafe would soften his heart up a little bit every time he walked in. So they actually played a very valuable role. Okay, so you can't have the show where everybody's wise and good, or everybody's horrible. You need a little bit of everything. Zarqa, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was also a bit of a more innocent time, I would say. I say that comparatively to today's time. Now we have Trump, and we have sort of the rise of the Nazis, and the right wing has gotten so much more dangerous. And I would think maybe the tone of the show more than the characters would change. Mm-hmm. It would be less. I mean, it was very kind of more soft and more amiable. But I think if the show would be made today, it would probably have a more of a stronger edge to it, because I think things have gotten more serious and more scary out in the world. And so probably the show would reflect that reality if it was being made today.
Right, some of the consequences and darker sides of those kinds of extremes on the opposite end of the spectrum. And so our second question is, what advice do you have for BIPOC students and students from marginalized communities that are looking to break into the creative industries?
This is such a good question for Michael, because he teaches.
Well, first of all, it's a very exciting time for members of the BIPOC community, because finally people are really open, not just open but encouraging of people of all types, right? Diversity is now really top of the list. Inclusivity is important. And so it's really a rich time, a great opportunity for many young people. If you're a member of that community and you're considering going into film and television or journalism or any of these media fields, I highly encourage it. I think it'd be great. I'm really excited to be working on a new show with Zarqa, which has some young directors on it who come from an indigenous background and come from an Islamic background. And I've worked on other shows which have indigenous writers and stars and directors, and I've really been inspired by them and learned a lot from them. Funnily, when I was approached to do the pilot for this show, I was working on another pilot of a show in Halifax created by Floyd Kane called North South, that was all about racism in the Halifax area. So I have really been embedded in this, and this is what I love to tackle, and I really encourage young people of any background to jump in. And now finally the doors are open and people are welcoming everybody, finally. So it's just a great, exciting time, a great opportunity. So just go for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Michael. I come from a writing background. So to me, I can advise that, like, to master your craft. You've got to be really, really good at it. It is so competitive. And so many people think that, this world that Michael and I belong to can be just whipped up. It's so easy. It's just like grab a bunch of actors and they say a bunch of things and, just pretty pictures, but it's so much work. I mean, we have been, Michael and I, like, he knows, like, it takes years of planning to get even a web series off the ground. And there's never been a time when there are so many free resources online, particularly, CBC has resources in terms of budgets and financing plans and federal tax credits. Like in this country, you really have to understand those elements of how to put together a show because they're really critical. We're not like the US where people just, like it's more of people just donate money or invest money. We have a lot of government funding agencies, but they have a lot of requirements. And those are, I've been working on this web series now for almost a year and a half. And just to go, it's like a very, complicated world of forms and budgets and finance plans. And you really have to learn it or find people who understand it. And like producers who are trying to come up, becoming up in future producers. And you need both sides of that, the organizational side as well as the creative side. Right. And there's an organization called the Independent Media Fund, which funds trailers for shows. And, I had went through that system. We got $30,000, made a trailer, and we're able to use that to convince the CBC to give us a license for a web series. And this is the first time I'm owning my own production. And like, it's just like, oh my God, like it's mind blowing the things that you have to know to make a television series from the ground up. And so learn the business side of it. Even if you're a creative person, it's important to do that and partner with people who can help you, because you can't be disorganized in a business like this. It's a million different decisions that have to be made and made really well.
Right. That's really good advice to think about the behind the scenes work. It's not just having that one big idea and it's done. And then lastly, well, it's not really a question, but we had a lovely comment from an anonymous attendee that I wanted to share with the panel. It says, I'm so grateful for the show. I grew up watching it and it means so much to me and my family. It always felt so authentic and I have yet to find something like it. And I guess I have to echo the sentiment as well. My family and I are new to this country, and this was the first time that we'd watched something that made us feel seen and made our experiences living in this country recognized. So thank you to Zarqa and Michael for all your work in creating this show and for your participation this evening. So that concludes the Q&A part of our event, and I'll hand it back to Charles to wrap things up.
Thank you.
Wow, I've had the joy of just sitting here listening to all this, and I wish it could go on all evening. It's wonderful. I want to thank you, Zarqa and Michael, not just for being here tonight, which is we've been thanked several times, but I really sincerely thank you for that. but for this incredible work that you've done. I know you've done a lot of other things, both of you, and you're doing things, but this is important work that really made a difference in a lot of people's lives. And I think that you're right, Zarqa, you sort of go into it as a writer, making people laugh, and you just do the best craft you can. But when that turns into something as impactful as this, I think it's important to just stop for a moment and just say, wow, you've really made a difference, and you've affected a lot of our lives. It isn't easy to get 2 million Canadians to watch anything. And I think you've been humble, just having dabbled. I'm older than you, so I was involved with comedy in the earlier stages of comedy. Setting aside for a minute this incredible task of doing something based on comedy around a Muslim family and mosque and so on, doing comedy in this country, right, was never a thing that happened predictably at all. And I think your series really made a lot of us, including the networks and others, think and say, look, if you do something meaningful, if you do something that's really funny, if you put it on and let people know it's on, Canadians will watch it. And it really had an impact just simply in the craft of comedy in this country, let alone as a game changer in many people's attitudes towards Muslim people and so on. I just a little side note. You mentioned the head of CBC Comedy at the time, Anton Leo at the time, who was a friend of mine, was also, just by the way, a graduate, an alumnus of the Creative School. He and I graduated in the same year, so I won't go into those war stories that were a decade or so before, more than a decade before. But it takes people in the CBC as well who are broad thinkers to support that. So I was really glad I knew about his involvement with it, but I was really glad you mentioned him. Thanks also for your advice. I mean, there's lots and lots of things, and this is really important to our students who will be tuning in after, as well as some here tonight. But things like be brave and be confident and be true to yourself and yet master your craft, and so many other things that you guys have shared that are really important. In addition to the inspiration of looking at two people who went through the journey here, never imagining that you would be doing what you're doing, and yet taking what you got as students and combining it with your life experience and making something so special. So I thank you again. I thank Iman for coordinating and emceeing the questions, and Rana for your great job in moderating this evening. It was great, and I want to thank all of you who joined us. Please stay in touch with our university and with the Creative School and with your specific professional school program. It means a lot to all of us, but particularly to the students that they hear from you. So take care, everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.